"Touch me again, human, and you die." But she never pulled away. Jack's hands were tied behind his back with something that burned like hot wire. His face was bloody, his uniform torn, and his legs barely worked as two alien soldiers dragged him through the cold steel halls of the fortress. They threw him into a small, dark cell with hard walls and no window. The door slammed shut with a heavy sound that echoed in his ears. Jack coughed, then laughed softly. "At least they gave me a room," he whispered. Even though no one could hear him, time passed slowly. He didn't know if it was night or day. All he had was pain, silence, and the sound of footsteps now and then. One set of footsteps returned again and again. They were sharp, heavy, and fast. Like someone with a purpose, she entered without a word. Tall, sharp-eyed, and wrapped in black armor that shimmered like glass. Her skin was deep violet, her hair pulled back into braids, her glowing turquoise eyes cold as ice. She stood at the edge of the cell, holding an electric staff, staring down at the human with disgust. He had seen her before, during the battle. She was the one who caught him. "You stink of weakness," she said, her voice smooth but dangerous. Jack grinned through cracked lips. "And you smell like—" "What is that?" "Burnt flowers." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, grabbing his shirt and lifting him up with one arm. "Speak again, and I'll break your tongue," she hissed. He didn't speak, but he smiled again, staring into her eyes. She looked ready to kill him, but then something strange happened. She didn't let go. Her fingers were still on his chest, pressed against his heartbeat. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes locked with his. Then she pushed him back hard, but not with full strength. She could have broken bones, but she didn't. Jack fell back against the wall and sat there, breathing heavily. He looked up and said softly, "You didn't pull away." She turned to leave. Pausing at the door, "Touch me again, human, and you die," she warned, but she didn't look back. And she didn't sound sure. The next night, she came again. Same footsteps, same silence. Jack sat up slowly, his back hurting, his throat dry. "You miss me already?" he asked. She walked closer and knelt down, placing a food tray near him. It wasn't much, just protein paste and water, but it was something. "Eat," she said, turning to go. Jack touched the edge of her glove. Just for a second, it was stupid, but he did it anyway. Her body froze, her head turned slowly. "You don't learn," she said in a low voice, stepping back into the cell fully. She reached for her staff, then stopped. Instead, she knelt again, this time closer, looking into his tired eyes. "You should be dead," she said. "Maybe," Jack answered. "But you keep coming back." She stared at him for a long time, then stood up. "You confuse me," she said, almost like it was a sin. "That is not safe for either of us." Jack leaned his head back against the wall. "Good, because safe is boring." This time, she left without a threat. No warning, no anger, just silence. The fortress outside was cold and full of metal. But something inside that cell had begun to change. Jack was still a prisoner. Still weak, still human. But she wasn't just his guard anymore. She was watching him. She was thinking, and when she touched him, next it wouldn't be to hurt him. And Jack, broken and bruised as he was, could feel it in his bones. The war outside was brutal, but the war inside her heart had just begun. Virel returned the next night. But this time she didn't say a word. Her boots echoed softly as she walked the metal floor, carrying another tray of food. Jack was sitting cross-legged now, his hands free but still bandaged. His eyes followed her every move, calm but curious. He had stopped making jokes, but the silence between them felt louder. Then words. She placed the tray down, then stood still, watching him. His shirt was half torn, revealing more bruises across his chest and shoulders. She shouldn't care, but something twisted inside her when she saw it. He picked up the cup slowly, drank, and looked up at her. "Don't worry." "I'm not going to thank you," he said with a tired grin. Varel didn't smile, but her lips twitched like they wanted to. "I wouldn't want your thanks, human," she replied, her voice softer than before. She didn't leave right away. Instead, she sat down near the door, her weapon resting beside her. The silence returned, heavy and hot. Jack shifted a little, then looked at her again. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked. She tilted her head like she wasn't sure how to answer. Finally, she said, "Because you haven't broken yet." He raised an eyebrow. "That's a reason to guard me or to learn from me." She looked away. "You asked too." Many questions. The lights flickered suddenly. A low alarm began to hum through the walls, slow and deep. Jack tensed, looking toward the door. "What's that?" he asked, standing with effort. Varel stood too, her eyes now sharp and alert. System breach. Someone triggered the inner sensors. Seconds later, a blast echoed far down the hall. Then another, closer. She moved toward the cell entrance. But Jack grabbed her arm. "You're not leaving me in here, are you?" She looked back at him, her arm still in his grip, her eyes narrowed. But she didn't pull away. Then she whispered, "Touch me again." "Human, and you die." But still, she didn't move his hand. She looked at it, then looked at him. He let go first. Slowly, she opened the cell with a hiss of the control pad. Then turned to him. "If you run, I'll shoot you myself," she said. Jack gave a faint smile. "Fair deal." They moved fast through the dim corridors. Red lights flashing across the walls. They could hear shouting in the distance. Weapons discharging, Varel led the way. But she kept looking back to make sure he followed. Jack was limping, but he didn't slow down. Somewhere between one turn and the next, they passed a group of fallen guards, bodies still smoking. Varel paused just long enough to grab extra ammo and scan the symbols on the walls. "We're not heading for the main gate," Jack noticed. "No," she answered. "We won't survive out there. There's another path underground." Another blast shook the floor, almost knocking Jack off balance. She reached out and caught him by the arm, pulling him close. For a second, they were face to face, her breath brushing against his cheek. "You really should let me fall sometime," he whispered. Her grip tightened. "Not yet," she said, then looked away. "Not until I figure out what you've done to me." They moved again, this time side by side. Through the hidden path behind the power cores, the air grew hotter, the walls tighter. Neither of them spoke, but both could feel it now. Something had changed. She was no longer just the guard, and he was no longer just the prisoner. Whatever came next, they were stepping into it together. And even though she didn't say it aloud, her silence said enough. She didn't want him to stop touching her, even if her words said the opposite. The tunnel walls were narrow, dripping with moisture, and lit only by emergency lights. Varel moved ahead like a shadow. Every step sure, every breath controlled. Jack followed close behind, his boots slipping once on the slick metal floor. She didn't laugh or comment, just offered a hand without looking back. He took it, gripping tightly, and they moved again. Neither of them let go, not right away. The air grew hotter the deeper they went. The fortress above was in chaos. But down here, it was quiet, too quiet. Jack finally asked, "Where does this lead?" Varel didn't stop, but her voice echoed off the narrow walls. "An old maintenance port beneath the forest ridge. It was sealed years ago, but I know the codes." Jack's eyebrows lifted. "You've planned this?" "No," she said simply. "But I always prepare." They reached a sealed blast door covered in moss and dust. Varel bent down and connected a small device to the panel, her fingers moving fast. Jack leaned against the wall, breathing hard. He was still weak, his ribs hurt, and every muscle screamed. But he didn't complain. she noticed anyway. "You're slowing down," she said, not unkindly. He gave a small shrug. "You're lucky I'm still walking." She looked back, her eyes catching the red emergency lights in a strange glow. "You could have run when the cell opened," she said, "but you followed me." "I figured I'd rather die beside someone interesting," he replied. She didn't smile, but her expression softened. Then the door creaked open. Revealing darkness and overgrown roots beyond, they stepped into the abandoned shaft. Vines crawling down the walls, old lights long dead. The floor creaked under their boots outside the far end. They could see faint blue light moonlight from the jungle above, but before they could take another step, a loud metallic growl echoed through the shaft. Jack froze. That didn't sound friendly. Viorel raised her weapon, eyes sharp again. Scavenger drone. She whispered, abandoned by the old empire, but still active. The thing appeared from the side, spider-like. Metal legs scraping. One glowing red sensor eye scanning for movement. It screeched and charged. Jack pushed Viorel to the side and rolled behind a support beam. The drone fired. A blast tearing through the wall where Viorel had stood seconds ago. She returned fire, but the drone was fast, climbing the walls like an insect. Jack grabbed a rusted pipe and struck its back leg. Causing it to stumble just enough, Viorel jumped and landed on its back, stabbing her blade into its eye. Sparks flew as it screamed and collapsed in a smoking heap. They both breathed heavily. Side by side in the quiet again. "You pushed me," she said slowly. "You moved me out of the way. I wasn't aiming to be polite," he said, wiping blood from his mouth. "Just didn't want you to get turned into soup." Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Then she reached out and brushed the blood from his cheek with her thumb. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched her. Her hand stayed on his face longer than needed. Warm, soft, trembling just slightly. Her voice came quiet. "I warned you before." Jack leaned closer. "Then say it again." She opened her mouth, but no words came out this time. Just silence. Heavy and strange and full of something more than threat. Then, without a word, she turned and led the way into the jungle. This time, he followed her without question. And her hand, once again, brushed his by accident, maybe not, whatever she was feeling. It was winning, and she still hadn't pulled away. The jungle welcomed them with steam and silence. Thick leaves hung low, dripping with moisture that glowed faint green. Insects buzzed with strange music. And the air tasted like metal and flowers. Jack stumbled as he climbed over a fallen tree. Catching himself on a root, Viorel didn't laugh. But she did pause to watch him struggle, her face unreadable. "You're bleeding again," she said calmly. Not looking away. "Yeah," Jack muttered, wiping his arm. "Your planet's not exactly tourist-friendly." They kept moving, deeper. Into the alien wild, the canopy above was thick, letting only pale blue light from the twin moons slip through. Viorel walked like she belonged here, her feet silent, her eyes always scanning. Jack followed with a limp, but never asked to stop. She noticed anyway, and finally said, "There's shelter nearby." She led him into a small cave behind a wall of hanging vines. Inside, it was dry and warm, with smooth stone and strange glowing moss along the walls. Viorel pulled a heat pack from her belt and placed it on the ground. Jack sat down beside it with a sigh, letting the warmth soak into his bones. "You always carry camping gear?" he joked, his voice weak but still sharp. She glanced at him. "I've survived worse than this." Rain started outside, soft at first, then heavy. It beat against the leaves like drums, muffling every other sound in the glow of the moss. Viorel looked different, less like a warrior, more like a woman. Her armor was scratched, her hair damp, and her eyes a little softer now. Jack leaned back against the cave wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Breathing deeply, she watched him silently. Then finally sat across from him. You don't act like the others, she said, her voice low. Other humans? He asked, eyes still closed. No, she replied. Other prisoners, he smiled faintly. Maybe because I never planned to be one. The silence grew heavy again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like a quiet waiting for something, for someone to move first. Viral looked at the bruises on his side, the gash above his ribs. She took a small vial from her pouch and knelt beside him. He opened one eye. What's that? Poison or help? Depends on how much you trust me, she said. She placed a hand on his chest. Steady and warm, he tensed, not from pain, but from the feeling. She poured the liquid onto the wound, and it hissed, making him grunt, but her hand didn't move. It stayed there, firm and gentle. You don't have to touch me like that, he whispered, voice low. She didn't answer. She pressed her hand harder against him, feeling his breath catch. Then her lips parted slightly as if she meant to speak, but said nothing. Jack reached up slowly, touching her wrist. Her body went still. She looked at him like a predator who suddenly forgot why she was hunting. His fingers traced her skin, just once lightly, unsure. Then she pulled back. But not with anger. She stared at him, something burning behind those glowing eyes. You're confusing me again, she said softly, and you still haven't told me to stop. He replied. Varel stood up fast, her armor creaking. She turned toward the cave mouth, hiding her face. But Jack could still see her hand. Was shaking slightly at her side. She whispered something so quietly he almost didn't catch it. Touch me again, human, she said, and I might not stop you. Then she walked into the rain, leaving him staring after her. And even though she had stepped away, it was the first time she didn't sound like a threat. The morning came slow and gray, hidden behind thick clouds and mist. Jack woke to the sound of movement outside the cave. He sat up quickly, pain shooting through his side, hand reaching for a broken metal rod he had kept beside him. But it wasn't an enemy. It was Virel, standing still under the soft rain, her back to him. Her armor soaked and clinging to her body like a second skin. She hadn't spoken since the night before. Not since those words that sounded more like a confession than a warning. Jack stood carefully, limping slightly, and stepped out to join her. You didn't sleep, he said, his voice low. She didn't look at him, only said, we're being tracked. His eyes sharpened. By your people. She nodded once, slowly. I saw the trail marks in the trees. Elite trackers, not far. Jack rubbed his face, of course, because nothing is ever easy. Virel finally turned toward him, her expression unreadable. You should go east, cross the canyon. They won't expect that, he frowned. You mean we should go east? She shook her head. No. I'm staying behind. I'll mislead them, give you a chance. He laughed once, bitter and soft. No way, he said. We started this. Together, we end it together. Her jaw tightened. I'm trying to save your life. And I'm trying to keep you in mine. He shot back, stepping closer. Why does that scare you more than death? For the first time, her eyes flickered not with anger, but pain. I wasn't made for this, she whispered. I was trained to hate your kind, to break you, not to feel this. Jack reached out, slowly, his hand resting on her shoulder. She didn't move, didn't breathe for a moment. Then she closed her eyes, just for a second, and leaned into the touch. Barely, but enough. Her voice came trembling. Don't do this to me. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching hers. I'm not doing anything to you, he said. I'm just here. She opened her eyes, and for a heartbeat. It felt like the whole jungle went silent. Then her body stiffened, and she pulled away, not with violence, but with fear. You don't understand. My sister is leading the hunters. Jack blinked, stunned. Your sister? Virel nodded, her voice now cold and focused. "Blood doesn't matter in war. She'll kill us both if she finds us." The weight of it all fell hard between them. Betrayal, duty, desire, none of it belonged in the jungle. Yet it all lived. There now, Viorel picked up her weapon, her fingers shaking for the first time since he met her. "I was supposed to return with your head," she said. "Not this." Jack looked at her, not with judgment, but something deeper. "Then do it," he said, stepping closer. "Take it, if that's who you still are." She raised her weapon, her eyes wild and stormy. It hovered just inches from his chest, humming with energy, but her hands wouldn't move forward. Instead, her arms dropped slowly, and the weapon hit the ground with a soft metallic thud. She looked at him like someone drowning in their own heart. "Don't you dare leave me," she said, her voice breaking, and this time she didn't pull away when he held her. She didn't whisper threats, didn't pretend to be unshaken. She just stayed there, wrapped in the warmth of someone she was never meant to care for. And outside, the hunters were getting closer. The sky above was dark with storm clouds. The wind had changed, carrying the scent of something sharp, blood, ash, and steel. Viorel crouched beside a broken tree, staring at the distant shapes moving through the jungle. Her people were close. Now, too close, the silence between the trees was full of death. Jack stood behind her, watching her face as it shifted between fear and something fiercer resolve. "They're surrounding us," she said quietly. Pincer movement, standard sweep pattern. Jack exhaled slowly. "And I guess a white flag won't work." She didn't answer. Her hands were already checking her weapon, counting charges, slipping blades into the hidden holsters across her waist and thighs. Jack watched her, then picked up the small shotgun he had stolen from one of the fallen drones. She looked at him sharply. "That's barely a stun device." "Then I guess I'll stun them with my charm," he said, giving her the smallest grin. She didn't smile back, but her fingers brushed his arm on purpose this time. They retreated to the ruins of an old outpost hidden in the cliffs. Half of it had collapsed, vines crawling over shattered walls and moss-covered control panels. But the high ground gave them one advantage: visibility. Jack set up what little gear they had, while Viorel paced the edge, watching the trees below with quiet fury. He finally asked, "What happens if they capture us?" Viorel's voice was flat. "You'll be executed. I'll be stripped of caste and exiled, or worse." Jack swallowed hard, then leaned back against the wall. "You don't have to stay." She stopped walking, turned slowly, and walked straight to him. "I made my choice the moment I didn't kill you," she said. "I'm not running from that." They stood close now, the storm wind pulling at their hair and clothes. Jack looked into her glowing eyes, searching for doubt. But there was none. He reached up and touched her cheek, slow and careful. She leaned into his hand, her breathing shallow, her skin warm. "This is insane," she whispered. "I should hate you." "You still can," he said gently. "But not tonight." Then he kissed her, not soft, not shy, but like everything could end in the next minute. And maybe it would. She didn't resist. She didn't threaten. She kissed him back with the fire of someone who'd been fighting herself too long. Their bodies pressed close, tangled in heat and confusion, and something that felt like need and hope at the same time. But then shouts in the trees. Movement, weapons charging. The moment shattered, and they pulled apart fast. Grabbing their gear, the enemy had arrived. Viorel's face changed, the warrior returning in full. She turned to Jack, voice sharp again. "We hold the high ground. They'll try to flush us out." He nodded, crouching beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "If we die," he said, "I want you to know I never hated you." She gave him one long look, her hand gripping his arm. "We're not dying tonight," she said. "I'm not letting them take you." Then the first shot hit the wall above their heads, and the night exploded in fire. They moved together like a single force vial, striking with perfect precision. Jack covering her with what little ammo he had, enemies climbed the rocks, shouting commands. But she was faster, deadlier, and now fighting for something more than pride. As the smoke filled the ruins and energy blasts lit up the darkness, Jack realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid to die anymore, but she was afraid to lose him. The ruins were burning, smoke curled into the sky like black ribbons. Torn by the wind, ash covered the floor, glowing like stars underfoot, bodies some human, some alien lay, motionless in the mud and stone, and in the center of it all stood Virel, blood dripping from a cut across her temple, her chest rising and falling like a drum in battle. Jack was kneeling beside a shattered console, holding his ribs, blinking against the smoke. They had survived the first wave, but more were coming. Too many, too soon, too strong. Jack looked up at her, chest heaving. "We're not walking out of this, are we?" Virel didn't speak, her jaw tight, her hands clenched, her body trembling. Not from fear, but from the decision she knew she had to make. A heavy silence fell. Then footsteps echoed from the slope. Slow, steady, heavy with purpose, out of the smoke stepped another figure, taller than Virel, clad in obsidian armor, a high command cloak dragging through the dirt. Her face was the same shape as Virel's, but colder, crueler. Her sister, General Syraxa. The hunters stood in formation behind her, weapons raised but silent. This was no longer a battle. This was judgment. Syraxa stepped forward, her gaze locked on her sister. "I expected more from you," she said, her voice sharp like glass. "You dishonor your blood." Virel stood still, then reached back and pulled Jack to his feet. Standing in front of him, "I made my choice," she said. Voice calm but strong. Syraxa's eyes narrowed. "You chose a human." Virel's grip on Jack tightened, but she didn't look away. "No," she said. "I chose freedom. I chose truth." Syraxa raised her weapon, and so did every soldier behind her. The air turned to ice. Jack whispered, "You should let me go." "Don't do this for me." She turned to him, eyes glowing with fierce light. "I'm not doing this for you," she said. "I'm doing this for us." Then, without warning, she stepped forward alone. Facing her sister, weapon lowered, arms wide. "I won't fight you," she said, "but I won't let you take him either." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the stars, and then it broke, not with a scream, but with the clatter of a dropped weapon, one by one. The soldiers behind Syraxa began lowering their rifles. One knelt, then another. They had seen something in Virel's eyes, something stronger than orders, something like truth. Even Syraxa's hand shook now, her weapon wavering, but she didn't fire. She looked at Jack, then back at her sister. "You're not my blood anymore," she said coldly, turning away. And with a single signal, the squad began to retreat into the smoke. They disappeared, leaving Virel and Jack standing in the ruins, broken but alive. The storm passed, and the jungle breathed again. Jack sat down, wincing. "I can't believe that worked." Virel dropped beside him, bloody and shaking, her voice barely a whisper. "Neither can I." They were quiet for a long time, just listening to the wind in the trees. Then Jack looked at her and smiled. "Tired but real. You still haven't said it," he said. "Not the threat, not the warning." She looked at him, then leaned in, her forehead against his, their breaths mixing in the cool air. "Touch me again, human," she whispered. "And this time, I'll never let go." And she didn't.